in to the 2020 Mineral Symposium of the Pacific Northwest chapter of Friends of Mineralogy. This is our first virtual symposium due to the current health restrictions because of the global pandemic, so we're glad that you're able to join us here today. Continuing along our 2020 theme, Aesthetic Minerals, Color, and Crystallography, our next speaker is Ray Hill, a longtime member of the Pacific Northwest chapter. Ray's passions include minerals of all sizes from micros to large cabinets, but they also encompass a love of the dark side, modified minerals, or in more polite terms, gemstones. He started his gem obsession by taking FGA gemology courses when he was only 16 and teaching himself to cut stones from John Sinkankas' famous book, Gem Cutting. Ray's personal gemstone collection now exceeds 300 pieces, including most of the top 10 rarest cut stones. It also includes many gem crystals. While it is true that the aesthetics of gem crystals is what drew him in, the mystery of the transformation process that turns rough gem crystals into shining, beautiful cut stones also engages him. Ray will share that obsession with you today. And now here's our own Ray Hill presenting The Good, the Bad, and the Beautiful, a story of transformation.
Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court here because I'm coming to talk about gems, and I'm in the middle of a group of people who are mineral lovers. But I must say, I'm not just a pure gem guy. I love minerals too, and I have done so all my life, since I was 9 years old. And what I want to share with you over the course of this presentation is a little bit of the relationship that man has had with gems and how gems have changed the world of man. So really, it's a story of transformation. And of course, the theme of this conference is the aesthetic. And by definition, I think aesthetics are the appreciation of beauty as found in nature or is translated into art. Now, history will show that man's inner aesthete, that part of us that loves beauty, always searched for ways to improve upon things in nature. And we found this not just with gemmy and colorful crystals, but archaeological research over the eons has discovered, even in the most ancient of human settlements, that minerals and gems have been touched, enhanced, changed in an obvious quest to make them more useful and more beautiful if possible. Now, just a slight aside, we're talking about the relationship that gems have with man and the power that gems have had in history. And I'm taking you back 55 years into the mid-60s. And the scene we're going to ask you to imagine here is the palace in Tehran, in Iran, where the new, well, maybe not so new, Shah, the young Shah, is looking at the world around him and living a jet-set life, but coming back to a 16th century country that he rules. And he wanted to try and bring his country into the future, into the present for that matter, away from the past into a world that has electricity and dams and water that everybody can get easily. But that costs money. And the only way the World Bank would loan him money is if he give them some kind of collateral. And the only collateral he had were the crown jewels of Iran, which was no small collateral. But the problem was no one knew what they were worth. So a team was put together, Tushingham, Mean, and Waite, and they were sent over to go and look at the crown jewels in the vault, in the central bank in the capital. But the problem with that was the only way you could get into that vault was by bringing almost all the people who populated the council that ran the country, because each one of them had a separate key that needed to be turned individually to open the vault. And then for the sake of security, for 3 hours a day for I don't know how long, these people had to shut down the government and sit inside the vault and wait for 3 hours, watching and making sure that nothing was stolen. So when Tushingham, Mean, and Waite walked into the vault for the first time, you can just imagine the absolute shock they experienced when they looked around what looked like the treasure room from any of the great movies showing treasure rooms, where of course everything there was fake, but in this case, it was real. Around them were thousands of items, treasure chests overflowing with pearls, natural pearls of great value. Diamonds and emeralds and sapphires and spinels in profusion everywhere, and very large and very perfect and just unbelievable in quality and quantity. So they were faced with a very daunting task to try and value this so they could use it as collateral. And one of the things they saw when they walked in there was the very famous large pink diamond, which still remains in the collection at the Crown Jewels, which is the Daria Yanur, which is a large pink diamond, which supposedly came from the Golconda diamond fields in India, when one of the previous Shahs invaded India and brought back booty to add to the grand treasury. They also saw the world-famous peacock throne that was enameled in gold and becrusted with gems. And then also they saw something that absolutely stunned them, a gem-encrusted solid gold globe which probably weighed more than 30 kilograms of pure gold, and covered in large emeralds and rubies and spinels and sapphires representing oceans, continents, and seas. So this was something to behold. At the end of their stay, a value was given and a country was changed. So gems don't just have a pretty face. Gems can change the world, and they have. I want to look a little bit further back in history than 55 years, however, and just take a quick look at some of the things that are in the collection at the Royal Ontario Museum that represent our evolutionary relationship with stones. Earliest man, in this case, man 425,000 years ago, and in this case in the United Kingdom, this beautiful agate chipped arrowhead was something that represents the earliest efforts of man to alter his environment to help him survive. In this case, he lived in a world where survival was a key. And you went from hand to mouth and you was hunt and gather. But as populations grew and civilization started planting and hunting in smaller areas, and as civilization evolved, it allowed for artisans. And so some 8,000 years ago in France, someone made a beaded necklace. And if you look in the top, you can see they bore a hole in actual, I think it looked like a quartz crystal, a doubly terminated one. So they took gem rocks from their environment and altered them to make jewelry. This is a luxury. It's not food in your mouth. It's not shelter over your head. This is a change. Now, further along the path of civilization, you see more of not just function, but beauty. And in this case, 4,500 years BC, a Swiss hunter-gatherer used a horn, and it looks like an antelope horn or a mountain sheep horn, and put in it a stone scraper. So basically, form and function are combined here, and this is a change. But over the millennia, power and magic and religion have often been associated with unusual rocks. For example, in the southwest of the United States, Navajos and Hopis, their men that do the medicine men had in their power bags chunks of turquoise or sky stone, because it was believed to have been something taken by the sky god and given to them, and they carved it and they did it, used it in their magical incantations to help people be cured. And quite frankly, this kind of relationship between unusual, colorful, and rare stones has been going on for a long time. And as in the case of this statuette from 2700 BC, it's quite likely it was part of possibly a religion or a religious group worshiping women. And that's great. At one time, women were worshipped because men knew without them, we would not be here. So as civilization advanced even more and became more specialized, the wealthy and the powerful were able to afford to have people who do nothing but artisanal work. And as an example, in this particular picture here, you can see a scarab from 1550 BC. And I might add, under my shirt here, I have a similar scarab from the same era, and on the back of it is a hieroglyph. And these were used to help the wealthy and the powerful into the next world. And on the back of the one I've got, the hieroglyph says everlasting protection. So clearly, they were doing something to protect themselves and the next life. And gems and jewelry played a part in it. As we get further along the timeline, you can see that they're graduated from soft soapstone-like materials to agate and in this case carnelian to make a carving which is pretty. And you can see that this is a change. Now, through history, we can see that it took time and experience and gathered knowledge, specialized gathered knowledge, to know how to carve and manipulate gem materials. And because this was something that only the rich and the wealthy could afford to support, it created a subculture of cutters, carvers, and these people actually worked hard just for doing one thing. And because of the materials they had in those days, sometimes it took 10 years or a year or 2 years to create an item. And so to work on stones that had special qualities like the star sapphire, you needed special knowledge. And so this was kept secret amongst the guilds and the craft guilds. And in India and Asia and the Far East, it was also kept secret amongst the cutters guilds. But Tavernier, a very famous gem traveler who traveled through Asia and the Far East, brought back to Europe the secret of faceting. Because up until that point, primarily stones in Europe anyway were cut en cabochon or carved and in the round. But learning to facet and enhance the amount of light coming through a stone to the top of it was a special skill. And Tavernier picked this up and shared it, something that previously was only known to the guilds and the secret societies who did cutting. In this case, this is a beautiful pink beryl. And the beryl families are quite unique because they have some of the largest gem crystals in the mineral world. In this case, you've got a 1,625 carat stone. So, in the mineral world, getting back to our reality here, any crystal of a mineral is actually a rarity. And anybody who's gone collecting, if not in a mine, not in a blast zone, knows this is true. Colorful mineral crystals, even rarer. And finally, colorful, gemmy, transparent material crystals, the rarest, and definitely considered to be the most valued whenever and wherever it could be found. So, of the mineral world, gem crystals actually command the highest prices, especially if they're very clear and colorful. The late great Rock Currier, who I had great respect for, in his advice to dealers to be successful, he had 3 rules. The 3 rules were color, color, and color. This is especially true for gem crystals. And here's an example of a beautiful gem crystal group that at the time when it was collected and brought into the Rice Museum collection was vaunted as the most attractive and beautiful emerald crystal group in the world at the time. As far as I know, that's what I was told anyway, by guys at the Rice Museum. And one of the really beautiful gems, which is actually quite limited in its occurrence in the world, is red beryl. And I'm very fortunate to have a few of these crystals, not as nice as this one. And this is from the LA County Museum. Now this is an ugly cousin, forsterite, which is basically the birthstone for August, peridot. And this is the only gem material that I know of in the world that has been found in extraterrestrial rocks. And there are, and I have one in my collection, cut stones from space of this particular gem mineral. And this one is a very nice one. And some of the nicest forsterites or peridots in the world right now seem to be coming out of Pakistan. And some very nice ones are coming out of Myanmar. And here's an example of a gem crystal that is extremely rare. benitoite. It only comes, as far as I know, I may be wrong on this one, but it only comes from one location. And so its quantities are extremely limited, and therefore the price, based on market demand, is very high. If you get a good crystal of benitoite, even more if you can get a good cut stone of benitoite, you are a lucky person. Now, one of the premier gem crystal collectors in the world, Peter Lichtberg of Luxembourg, was able to go in to the Ukraine and find some amazing heliodors, and he also was able to buy some from the miners over time. And quite frankly, these are some of the nicest gem crystals I think I've ever seen. Here's an example of something in the crystal form that looks almost as good, if not as good, as the cut form. And here's Peter with some fairly large gem spodumene. Now, I will admit I've seen better and larger, and that was at the Detroit show when Afghanistan freedom fighters were trying to raise money to get weaponry to fight off the Russians. And so when I went to the Detroit show that year when the freedom fighters were there with their spodumenes, they had special cases made that were very long, very wide and deep to accommodate these logs, these huge, absolute facet grade, gorgeous crystals of spodumene that they brought from Afghanistan to try and raise funds. And I think they made a lot of money. I think at one point I heard 25 cents a carat, and some of these things were 100,000 carats, million carats. So they made enough money to go back and defend their country. In the next slide, we see anglesite, which is a lead mineral, and actually has been cut into gems, and I'll show you one later on in my collection. But this one happens to be a pretty sizable one that belongs into the Jim and Gail Spann collection. And all these photographs from their collection were done by their son, Tom, and he's an excellent photographer, as you can see, unlike myself. Topaz, it's a beautiful stone, but this one, if you note, is blue. And blue is not a commonly occurring color in topaz, and yet, when you go to the jewelry stores these days, that's all you see. And you can thank Charlie Keyes of Florida for that, because Charlie, when in the early ages of radiation, thought he'd heard that the radiation changes the color of crystals. So he asked a friend of his to test some of this white goshenite, useless, very invaluable white topaz he had, to go and see if it had an effect from being radiated. And sure enough, it turned it blue. So he figured out how to get different grade levels of blue by using different levels of radiation. So if you're looking for a crystal that's blue, make sure you find out before you buy it whether it's pre-radiation or post. And here's a nice aquamarine, again from the Spann collection. 11 centimeters, a good size and great color. An aquamarine, like the other beryls, can occur in fairly large crystals, but the really good gemmy ones like this generally don't come in the larger sizes. Although I recently saw one that's probably going to be sold for over $1 million that was found in Pakistan that looked absolutely amazing with incredible color. And this is this is the funny thing about gem crystals. They don't always look that great. And most of the rubies that are coming out of Mogok in Myanmar are alluvial. And so they're not pretty sharp things that you like to look at in pictures. They're actually quite sort of gross. And it's the craftsman and the artist that change them into something beautiful. But again, the color here is stellar. And in the New Age, we'll talk about this in a minute, but soft minerals like sphalerite are becoming quite popular when you can get good rough to be cut into gems. So I included a sphalerite. This is a very nice one, again from the Spann collection. Here's one of my favorite blues. It's a euclase, and it's from Colombia. And there's also beautiful euclases that have come out of Brazil. And I saw a nice one in the collection in Sydney, in Australia, in the museum there. Beautiful one. And I actually have one that I'm waiting to get cut. It won't be as nice as this, but that's a beautiful, clean, clear crystal, again from the Spann collection. And feldspars for eons have been collected to do cabochon work, to make moonstones and that sort of thing. But some of these really clear, gemmy feldspars make beautiful, lively gems. And it's interesting that Madagascar is turning out to be a very plentiful and valuable mining location for gem minerals. rubies, etc. It's just actually amazing the quality that's coming out of this troubled country. And here's something else that you're seeing again with this soft cut stone market that's happening, is things like fluorite. You're seeing more and more being cut. And this color in this particular Chinese one from the Span collection is very reminiscent of the pinks of the fluorites from the Alps, which command very high prices because of the alpine nature of the collecting area and the nature of the Swiss, who are very, very possessive of their very good specimens. And from California, here's a nice little spessartine garnet from the LA County, again. And again, Peter Lichtberg traveled far and wide in Afghanistan and Pakistan and got to know an awful lot of the miners and the people there who collected. And this is a particularly nice aqua color and clarity that belonged to the collection of Mahfouz Ullah, a friend of Peter in his travels through Pakistan. And Peter tells a story one time of over there sitting down with his guide and friend who is going to take him around to do some buying. And right across the lake from where he was staying in the cottage was a meeting of mullahs of the, looking at what they're going to do in the world sense with their religion. And they found out there was a white guy over there, and they came over, and an elder came over with a young man to translate, to ask him what he was doing in Pakistan, hoping to find out that he was coming to rape and pillage and ruin the country. And Peter's an interesting guy. He has royal blood, and he didn't want to admit to this leader of the mullahs that he was someone of royal origin. He said, well, my grandmother grows her own vegetables and cooks them. This immediately got the respect of the mullah, thinking this is just a common man like me. He's not someone special trying to come and take advantage of my people. And so Peter, the perfect diplomat, got through that sticky situation by thinking on his feet. But he got to collect more, and he's still around to tell us about it. Now, I really like Peter McGaw. He's the guy that runs all the displays over in Tucson show, but he also is a geologist and a collector of and very knowledgeable of Mexican minerals. And here's a fairly rare kind of opal. Like common opal will fluoresce, and usually it fluoresces in this kind of color, like highlight opal. But this opal is fluorescent in daylight. And so it was quite uncommon, and this is from Zacatecas, and I think it's a really unique looking piece, because I happen to love opals. And the spodumene you saw earlier, when you get them very intensely colored in pink, they're named kunzite, and basically they look amazing. And they cut very bright stones if you get a good clean piece. And another stellar example of good gem crystals from the Span collection. Now, believe it or not, Vesuvianite would not be your first in your list of cuttable gems, but I've seen and appreciated small but very nice Vesuvianites from Asbestos, Quebec. And this is a particularly gemmy piece from the ROM collection. Another gem crystal, very typical of the location in California, in the White Queen mine. There's a lot of Clevelandite there, and this is a nice, clean, nice pink, good example of morganite from the Span collection. And here's a nice rubellite, not very big, but it's a nice rubellite crystal that's from the ROM collection, and it's also from the same general area in San Diego County, from the Palaquine mine. Now, I just want to share with you a little brief story here about a success story, about a gem material and a mineral that was beloved and very expensive and American. And this pictorial history is just looking at the Collector's Edge owned and operated the Sweet Home mine, from which most of the famous big pink, beautifully created in nature crystals of rhodochrosite were. And they hoped and prayed that they could find another vein. And after a lot of blasting and exploration and money, they actually hit a new find, a new pocket, a new vein. And they called it the Detroit City Portal. I'm not quite sure why, in the famous Sweet Home mine. And one of their newest employees, last year I think, Phil Person, who's a master's of geology, was actually down there mining and happened to be there when they opened up and found some really excellent quality rhodochrosite crystals. And here's one here, a eureka moment. And this, to my mind, from what I've seen in the shows and in museums is the nicest, gemmiest rhodochrosite I've ever seen. And it now belongs in a private collection. But Annette did a good job of capturing the lipid, the transparency, and the intensity of the color, which is kind of hard to do on cameras, by the way. And what amazed me the most was somehow they managed to get these things set, because I'm a jeweler for over 50 years now, and I've had my setters set soft stones before, and they have sweated bullets, and it really was because the slightest slip and the stone will crack, chip, or break. And here we are with stones that have the same sort of structure as calcite, easily cleaved, easily chipped, and they're set in gold jewelry. I think that's amazing. And the Van Pelts took that picture. Okay, so how are we transforming gem crystals and rough into gems? Well, everywhere you go in North America, there are lapidary clubs, and they're full of cutters. But then there are amongst them, rarely, I call them an elite group, a special group, and I call them artists, because I'm a cutter. I've taught myself, and I have been taught, and I'm technically okay, but I'm not an artist. I consider people that belong, like for example, the Coast to Coast Rare Stone gem cutter group, late Stephen Kotlowski, Jay Medici, the Wobitos in Ontario, Brett Kosnar, John Killian, and a whole bunch of others. They're the artists. The difference comes from their years of experience coupled with the use of science, maximizing light and color and acquired touch. Now, Brett Kosnar has really moved strongly into the field of soft stones, and to do that, you really have to have what he called the touch, which he is finally very happy to say has got a good grip on. And it's a gentle touch, and you have to use very fine grinding and very true wheels, or you lose your stones. So these people are very skilled. The other thing we don't realize, unless you know someone who does cutting, is it's a slow, painful, long process for the most part. And once you cut the initial facets, you have to reposition the lap for polishing on exactly the same surface, so you get true facets that don't overlap each other. They have sharp meets, as they call it. And that's a skill. And that's a special skill when it comes to things that aren't rubies, sapphires, that are more forgiving than soft stones. So the science now also includes computer programs. So a skilled cutter artist can enter the dimensions of the rough into a special computer program that's been devised, and give them the refractive indices and the hardness and all the cleavages and everything of that mineral. And the computer will map out a design that will give them the most yield with the least trouble. And this is something that shows how we've moved along the pathway of art and technology. So there's always been artists throughout our history who have taken the mundane and made it beautiful. It is their sense of the aesthetic that has given us beautiful gems, transformed roughened crystals using a combination of science and technology and the manipulation of light. Because all this beauty that we see in gems is nothing but a play of light and color in our eyes. Since their media are expensive, these artists are not only skillful at seeing the gem inside the rough, like a sculptor seeing a future form in a block of marble, but they are also responsible for maximizing the color, the play of light, while working at the same time to maximize weight. And I used to be very naive about this. I said, oh, look at this stone. It's a great shape. I should be able to get, 50 or 60% of this. And I got laughed at, because really 30%, with all the things that come into play when you're making a decision to cut and shape a stone, is actually not a bad beginning point for good yield. And a lot of people, when they look at rough and they get it cut, may be surprised the size of the stone they get back compared to the size they left. The new generations of gem artists, as I mentioned earlier, are pushing the definitions of what a cut gem is. They're moving away from the old school of traditional gems, the sapphires, the rubies, the emeralds, and so on, which featured color, durability, and popularity, to literally almost any mineral that is clear and gemmy. I have great respect for Jay Medici, who, for example, cut and polished a maybe Michigan sulfur crystal. I saw it. It was a beautiful gem. Very sharp corners, beautiful clarity. I said, how the heck did you do that with sulfur? Because it has almost zero tolerance for heat and vibration. And others I've heard have managed to transform and facet minerals like halite and viomite which are water-soluble minerals and then cut them into gems. And zeolite, by the way, is a dangerous thing to cut because it also is toxic. So if you're cutting that, you have to wear special gear and be patient, of course, and have the touch. So these aesthetic transformations are amazing, I think, and apparently only limited by the skill and patience of the artist as to what they can do. Now, all these things, and we're coming back to my original subtitle, Transformations. And I say this jokingly. A friend of mine, someone I love dearly, is Dave Joyce. He's a Canadian mineral dealer, and a lot of you know him. And he jokingly once commented to me, "Oh, you gem guys are just people who grind up perfectly good crystals." And I told him, I said, "No, Dave, if I can get a chunk, I'll do that. I will not carve up a nice crystal unless it's absolutely the only way I can get a gem from a mineral." And sometimes that's the only option. His sentiment, however, jokingly stated as it was, reflects the feeling of many serious mineral people, maybe some among you, regarding the gem cutting community. And it makes many people think that this wanton massacre of gemmy crystals is a bad thing. But history disagrees. I'm just going to show you a few rough and cuts because it's good to, I think, to see what can be done with what doesn't look that exciting to start off with. And of course, usually the rough and cut sets, they don't give you a gem quality facet grade crystal to show it with. So you just see a nice crystal. And this is a nice crystal of Durango apatite. And I've got quite a few of them. And I have a couple of stones, but none as nicely cut as this one in Pete McGaw's collection. And here's some of the collection material from Peter Lickberg that I showed you earlier. And he got into this Heliodor mine and collected more than once. And I gave you all it was from this particular crystal is from the 1976 find in the Golodnaya mine, Alabaska pegmatite field, North Mersinska, Sverdlovskaya Oblast, Urals, Russia. My, that's a mouthful. And the crystal there is 5.5 centimeters, so a little over 2 inches. And the cut stone beside it is 10 carats. And one of the group of Coast to Coast Gems, Michael Gray, is the one who cut it. And Nadia, his wife, designed the ring. So here you can see form and beauty coming from a rough stone. Now, one of the trickiest stones, and I know a lot of cutters will refuse to cut calcite because it's caused them more headaches over the years than they care to admit to. And I just wanted to show you, this is actually a local Bancroft. I went to Bancroft a lot as a teenager, and I've got calcites that came out of the Faraday or the Madawaska mine. It's had different names. It was a uranium mine. And down inside it, they had some very nice clean calcites. And actually, there's a nice cut one done by, I think, Michael Gray, but I'm not sure, in the Bancroft Museum. And here's some examples that are in the National Museum in Ottawa, photographed by Michael Bainbridge. An excellent job of that. It's a tough thing to photograph. And you can see the one on the left and a little bit, and the ones in the middle, a little bit of refraction. That's actually hard to get because calcite, as you know, has double refraction. So when you look through it, you see things doubled. So you have to play some tricks with the way you orient the stone when you're cutting it to try and get not only clarity, but also to try and get some refraction. Now this one really surprised me, catapleite. I've seen it, it looks pretty fragile, and here we are with a nice cut stone, up to almost 2 carat stone, cut from catapleite. And usually it's in microscopic and slightly larger crystals in the Mount St. Hilaire quarry in Poudret. And this stone here, I think, came from Bill Pinch. I don't know if the crystals did. And again, Michael photographed this at the National Museum. And here's one of those cut and rough from the Detroit City Portal, showing the rough together with the cut from Alma, Colorado. And I think this is from the old, it might have been from the old mine. It might be from the Detroit City Portal. But in any case, Collector's Edge has done some amazing things by reopening and finding more of this wonderful mineral. And here's one, Hackmanite. I used to collect it up in Bancroft. It didn't look like this. And Hackmanite has a wonderful quality that when you radiate it with ultraviolet light, it turns pink. And here's a great example of it there. The cut stones, 3 1/4 and 2 1/2 almost, and they belong to Gilles Lanon, I think originally, and they came from him to the museum. And Gilles is a famous collector of minerals from Mount St. Hilaire. And hessonite garnets, well, there have been some nice garnets that have come out of asbestos, but not anymore. Asbestos is closed down because we're all afraid of asbestos. And here's a 9.7 centimeter specimen with some decent size, very nice colored clarity crystals on it, and below some nice examples of the hessonite garnets cut. And this is actually world-class stuff when you get a clean one. Again, from the National Museum. And I put these two together because I wanted you to see a real transformation. Because the ugly duckling on the top, these were found at one time, a long time ago. They're no longer readily available. They're hard to get. These malachite-coated cuprites that were solid, gemmy cuprite on the inside, but ugly duck malachite alteration on the outside. And so with careful removal, you either got a winner or you didn't. And in this case, I got a winner with this cuprite that's underneath, and I bought through Rod Tyson. I'll show it later. Sereandite, one of those famous colorful minerals from Mont Saint Hilaire. I never in my life before I saw this picture knew they'd faceted a clean looking stone out of it. So that to me is amazing. 1 1/3 carat clear Sereandite. I'd never even imagined that existed. Now, our friend Michael Lickberg is famous not just for his heliodors, but also for his calcites, because he found what he called the butterfly pocket, in which some of the most beautiful calcites in the world were, and as the one shown on the left here, came out. And he's exhibited them all through the European shows. I don't know if he's exhibited them in Canada. But to give you some sense of things, this is a terrible stone to cut. And Michael Gray probably is the best guy in the world that I've heard of for cutting large calcites. And here we have almost an 800 carat and almost 300 carat calcites. And calcite's not that dense a stone, so those are pretty big stones. And they look beautiful. I mean, who'd think Tums could look so good? Titanite, not a big stone from Canadian locations. I've seen beautiful titanites from Asia, and they cut up beautifully. And this just happens to be one of our own in Canada. And again, from the National Museum, from Chibougamau, Quebec. And here's the infamous Viomite. It's found in the Urals. No, sorry. No. That peninsula in Russia. It just escapes me right now. But Viomite is a soluble, water-soluble stone. And to cut a water-soluble stone has to be a bit of a challenge. I understand you have to use oil instead of water, because otherwise you dissolve the stone. This again from Poudrette. Very hard to get good stuff from Poudrette, and even more difficult to get beautiful cut stones. I just missed out on a chance from coast to coast to buy a Poudrette Viomite, and maybe I'll get lucky again sometime and get one. So a lot of gems are really ugly ducklings before they're done anything with, before they're transformed. So I wanted to just share with you my search for beauty amongst the stones that are out there. And of course, my favorite is opal. And this has to be one of the exceptions, because you can actually play with opal raw and set it raw, and it still looks beautiful. It doesn't have to be faceted. It doesn't have any of those things necessary. But sometimes, for the sake of commerciality, you really need to cut an opal so someone can wear it. But I don't know. This one's 1,001 carats. And the new field of opals in the world, of course, is Ethiopia. And opals come from a lot of parts of the world, including Canada. But I don't think any place has as much variety and clarity as Ethiopia. And right now, Ethiopia is doing to Australia what Australia did to the European location in Czech Republic, which used to be in Hungary, for the opals there, because they came out with bigger, finer, and better. And here we are. You got stones coming out of Ethiopia that look as good as black opal from Australia, fire opal from Mexico. All the colors are there. So opals, common opal doesn't have much to going for it, because it looks dull and uninteresting. And common opal and precious opal are both made up of tiny, little minute spheres of silica. So when you give precious opal, whatever conditions are necessary for that, they line up in the same size groups. Like all the little spheres are identical, instead of being all different sizes as they are in common opal. And that allows light going in to be refracted equally across the patch and come out in spectral colors. And to me, as an opal dealer and lover and cutter, over the years, the best opals I ever saw were ones that when you turned them, you had maybe 4 or 5 colors from the same spot. And that's a good, in my mind, that's a great opal. And here's an example on the top of one of the, I'd say a good crystal Ethiopian opal. That's just a stunning stone. And as good as anything from Australia, I hate to say. And on the bottom is a lightning ridge black opal, showing its great reason for being valuable, because it's black and it makes all the colors just leap out when you look at it. So opals are cut, valued on how distinct the colors are when you look into them. In other words, the clarity of the matrix that the fire is growing in, how well defined the patterns are. The most desirable one is called harlequin, because it looks like the pattern on a harlequin gesture from the courts of the Renaissance. And the background coloration, which determines a lot of the cost. So orange for fire opal in Mexico, and Mexican opals I think are still beautiful. And you could also get some of those occasionally from Brazil and Ethiopia. And white and crystal for white to clear body color, and of course the highly valued one is, as I mentioned earlier, is black, since it gives the greatest contrast in color. So when we search for beauty, one of the most widespread determinants for beauty in gems is obviously pure color. It just feels good to look at, something that's saturated in color like this amethyst, for example. So color is so important in valuing colored stones that when you look at something of the higher end stones like rubies and sapphires, they have very distinct ideal colors. In this case, this stone is a pigeon blood red, which is the ideal color of a ruby, and sort of a almost hazy but beautiful misty blue cashmere. And unfortunately, the cashmere location has been lost under slides over many times, so the mining there is either very dangerous or non-existent. So maybe cashmere blue sapphires are no longer going to be available, I don't know, but I haven't heard of any for quite a while. But those are the two ideals up in the sky for the perfect colors for those stones. So color is important, and even to the point they need to be graduated. But when you're cutting for color, you want to get the best color you can. And so a cutter takes a look at the material he has at hand, and they know from experience that if you put the color, because crystals aren't usually completely identically saturated from one end to the other. They have zones in them, and it's particularly corundum. So what they try and do is have the zones parallel to the table on top of the stone. So when you look down into the stone looks fully saturated with the color that's further down in the stone, and or maybe just below the surface of the table. But they do that to maximize the color, because color means money when you're dealing with these fine stones. Now, other reasons for color other than ruby and emerald, which have a coloring agent, chromium, that causes the red and the green, which I thought was kind of interesting. Two completely different colors caused by the same element, but different reactions within the structure and lattice of the crystals. And then some others owe their effect to crystal structure, what their crystal structure has on light, such as iolite or water sapphire, and andaluzite, and tanzanite. And these stones exhibit what's called pleochroism, which basically means they can produce more than one color. And this means if you orient the stone in different directions relating to the c-axis and the direction of light, you'll yield different colors. And you could see the way this cube was cut of iolite, that you could see at least 3 different colors. I say 2, but I've got one of these as well. And you can turn it one direction and see like a gray blue, another one blue, nice intense purple blue, another one sort of a yellowish. So it's interesting to see that. And andaluzite was the first gem I ever bought rough of. And I got it through Greiger's down in Chicago. And it was exciting when I got it in the mail. It was small. But it was another example of a stone that had more than one color in it. And here with this unpolished, upside down stone of andaluzite, you can clearly see the green and the red, more than one color. And zoisite, or tanzanite, particularly tanzanite variety of zoisite, has the capability of pleochroism. And if you cut it the right way, you can see more than one color right in the same stone. And that's a very interesting cut on that stone, because it actually shows that. One other stone, this is one of my ones that are dear to my heart, is alexandrite, because it's my birthstone. And the story goes that the mine manager at the gem mine in the Urals was in his office, and a miner came rushing up from the deeps, thinking he had in his hand, thinking he discovered a ruby. And when he came out into the light, it changed color to green, And out of superstition and fear, he dropped it on the ground. But the mine manager picked it up. He was not a stupid fellow. He was an educated man. And he looked at it and he said, this is an opportunity. And he knew that the young Tsar Alexander was doing a tour in the area and invited him over to the mine and offered him the honor of naming this new stone in the national colors of Russia, by the way, Alexandrite, after Tsar Alexander. And of course, being the ego-driven and leader that he was, he said, that's a wonderful idea, and hence we have Alexandrite. Now, this is interesting. Some stones depend completely on the skills of the cutter to show their beauty, and I call diamond one of those, and that's because I'm a colored stone man. And I like diamonds. I think they're amazing. And I'm going to show you something here. I'm hoping it'll show up. I don't know if you can see this or not, but this is a 1935 carat, perfectly proportioned and cut cubic zirconia. And I picked it up at the AGTA in Tucson a number of years ago. And I've had more fun and reactions to this stone, which sparkles immensely, refracts light like the best diamond. And it's no wonder this synthetic was used to try and imitate diamonds. But the point I'm trying to make is that when you look at a diamond, basically the cutter has had to try and orient the crystal that he got to cut in the first place, or the chunk, so that when it's cut, it'll have the perfect amount of reflection inside, so that 90 or more % of the light that goes into the stone reflects back out the top. It's called total internal reflection. And in diamond, having a high refractive index, it actually bends light, breaks it up into its component colors, and hence refracts the light. And therefore it sparkles and looks wonderful. But diamonds aren't the only stone that have high refractive indices. And lately, I've seen more and more in the gem shows magnificently sparkling refractive examples of this stone, which is sphene. And sphene has a very high refractive index, and it's coming into its own, I think. Now, I would be remiss if I did not mention phenomenal stones, because it's one of my pet interests. And phenomenal stones are any stone that actually does something with light, other than just reflects it out. And this is usually due because of internal twinning, or inclusions, or tubes, or structures, and uses especially the skills of the cutter to orient them so these will be highlighted and be perfect. And this is a cat's eye chrysoberyl, a very valuable stone, and it's got the ideal color for chrysoberyl, which is a yellow to yellow-green, and it's got a perfect, really sharp eye across it, and that's ideal when you have a cat's eye. Now I'm going to add that in the cultures of Asia and in the East, stones that did this sort of thing were actually considered to be dangerous to look at, except for their owner. And owners really took advantage of this. Whenever they wore these large gems, they made sure the public could see them. They knew that they were protected by the magic qualities of the eye, looking at people. So people would look down, be forced to look down, instead of looking at the wealthy person going by, because they were afraid of being affected by the eye or the star. And the moonstone is no exception. Again, some of these stones were very large and very obviously worn by the potentates and the wealthy, who were able to afford the cost of supporting cutters and buying very expensive gems. And of course, our native stone in Canada, labradorite, and this one's probably from Madagascar, mind you, but it's got a Schiller flash. That was named after Schiller, and it either is an oil slick orange, yellow, red, blue, which is ideal, or it's pure blue, and the blue is always beautiful. And this is called labradorescence, named after the stone, and it's usually cut, as you can see here, oriented about 3 degrees off the plane of cleavage to give the Schiller. And a friend of mine was doing some remote flying in Labrador, and at one point the plane took a turn going towards the camp, and the setting sun caught the top of a ridge at just the right angle, and the entire ridge flashed labradorite blue. I said, did you go back and stake a claim? He said, I couldn't. I was too busy. I said, oh, why tell me stories like this? That sounded like a dream come true for someone who wanted to get a hold of some of that really good labradorite. Now, asterism, again, is another one of those special phenomena that stones can have that add to their value and their desirability and their beauty. And this is a particularly nice one for the Royal Ontario Museum collection. But when cutters cut, they want to try and, as I said earlier, maximize the light coming through the table. But in other cultures, the emphasis is maximize the yield from the material I give you, Mr. Cutter. And so they cut for weight. And often that means you've got a shallower stone than you should have had to be able to reflect back all the light through the table on the top. And you get what happened here, which is called a window. And you can virtually read the newspaper through a stone like that. And it's worth much less than a stone that's got lots of life like these stones. So in the search for beauty throughout the world of gems, we know that it doesn't just happen. Gems aren't just a pretty face. They have altered the world. They've altered history. They've saved monarchies. They've updated countries. And they've made women and men equally happy to wear them, to give them, and to have them. So I think the greatest aesthetics of anybody's life is if they can appreciate the beauty that's found in natural gems that have been transformed by the artists who cut them. So I'm going to show you a few other stones from various people. This is one of my own. It's a 44.3 carat cuprite, and I got it through Rod Tyson a long time ago when he decided he didn't want to do gems anymore, and I said, hallelujah, I'll buy them. And so this is a pretty large cuprite. And this, I'm proud to say, is a fluorite that I collected in Dundas Quarry and had Rudy Wabito cut for me. And another one of the ones I got from Rod was this killer Santander, Spain sphalerite, 67 carats. It's a good size. There are bigger ones, I've seen them, but this is mine, so I love it. Now, kunzite, we looked at the spodumene earlier. When it's cut properly and when it's got good clarity, it is a phenomenally beautiful stone. And it was named after the famed gemologist Frederick Kunz in honor of the work he'd done in the field. And this one here is no small potato. It's 463.5 carats, which gives testimony to the fact that this, like beryls, this group of gems, the spodumenes and the beryls, can produce large stones because the crystals can occur in large gemmy pieces. Now this is one I'm particularly proud of because I bought this at the Northwest Chapter Friends of Mineralogy meeting a number of years ago, and it came out of a guy's pocket. The guy owns World Circle Minerals. And it came from a strategic location that had been used in the war for periscope calcites. And this was cut to try and counteract the problem of calcites, which is the twinning, as you look through it, the doubling of things, the double refraction. And it was cut right with the twinning zone between two crystals right down the center of the stone. So as a result, it refracts light like a diamond. And I've had people who did not know what stones were say, wow, that's a big diamond. I don't know you could afford something like that. I can't. And this is a stone I got from Mr. Wabito when, actually got it from Rudy after his dad died. And the Wabitos are a famous family in Ontario who've been cutting for years and through generations, all the way back to Eder Oberstein. And his dad, who cut this, was considered at the time to be one of the top 3 cutters in the world, and his specialty was my favorite stone, alexandrite. Anyway, 9.6 carats from places some of you may have collected, Bear Lake Diggings near Bancroft. It's a fun place where the bugs take your blood and they don't give you anything back. And here's a sunstone, nice little feldspar that refracts light and makes it look absolutely beautiful if you get a good one. And this is almost 6 carats, and again from the Rice Museum collection. But this is brucite. This is the stone that's been dominating the colored mineral market for some time now because it's a beautiful yellow. And I got this at 6.5 carats, and it came from Baluchistan, Pakistan, like the other ones did. And this is a difficult, interesting stone to cut because A, it's not in crystals form, it's in botryoidal groups on top of as crusts. So to find a clear area, let alone one big enough to cut a stone like this, 6.5 carats, I found to be amazing, and I was so glad to get it. This is a nice size anglesite. Anglesites don't usually get very big. This is almost 30 carats, and it's from Twisit. And you saw earlier on a beautiful big, with gemmy areas and a beautiful big anglesite from Twisit that belonged to the spans. And this is what it could be if it was cut. And this is just another rendition of that daylight fluorescent luminescent opal that from Zacatecas that Pete McGaw had, and it's now, I believe this is the one that's in the Smithsonian. And this, my greatest pride, when I was taught how to facet by Rudy Wabito, I created this stone. And it's flawless almost, and all the facets meet perfectly, and it's got a wonderful red flash. And I've talked to people who get supplied stones and crystals from Mexico, and they've assured me they have not seen or heard of a bigger cut stone from this location than this one. So I feel very proud that not only do I have it, but I cut it. So, to summarize, they say that beauty lies in the eye of the beholder, but the plays of color and light found in well-cut gems may well be universally appreciated. We owe the privilege of seeing these to the many people over the ages who have uncovered the secrets of artful transformation of rock into gem, like Tavernier and John Sinkankas, making that information freely available once it was held secret, and allowing you and I to appreciate something that only the rich and the powerful of the past had uniquely to themselves to be able to enjoy. Thank you.
Wow, thank you. Great tour of a lot of great gemstones, and I think it's great to, in Friends of Mineralogy, we tend to concentrate on the minerals, the crystals, and things that have not been cut, and we hate seeing beautiful crystals cut, but I think that it's good to see what transformation can take place in a gemstone. And so that was great for you to walk us through that. It also helps us, I think, to improve our eye in looking at the minerals and appreciating them. So we are right up against noon or 1 o'clock and time to start our next talk. Do we have any questions, Jessica?
No, it doesn't look like any questions have come in. So I think, Ray, that was fascinating. So thank you very much.
I do actually need to say one thing here, that in the pictures I showed from the Rice collection, unfortunately, I transposed the credits for the photography. So the emerald picture was actually done by Edwin Arpino, and that beautiful sunstone was photographed by Julian. So just wanted to correct those things. And also to thank, just for a second, all the many people who loaned me their photographs, including Michael, to be able to share in this talk. And it was a privilege.